Guys, can we talk about the political and economic state of the world right now? For most people, life has gotten a lot harder. And if you look at measures of happiness across the world, it's been in steady decline for the last few decades. In the 1930s, famed economist John Maynard Keynes said that we would be working 15-hour work weeks by 2028. Actually, the opposite happened. We work more than 40 hours a week if you count odd jobs and side hustles. So some data points that I noticed working in quant trading, 15 years ago, it was actually easier to get into this industry. It was maybe 2 rounds of interviews, one on campus and then one on-site interview. And now it's 5 or more at some places. And before you even get a chance to talk to a human, they ask you to take a online code assessment, like a coding exam. It's just gotten a lot more competitive. And I've been on the recruiting side of a lot of these trading firms. I've seen the progression of things get more competitive. It's mostly just supply and demand. There's just way more applicants. And so beggars can't be choosers, but ballers can be choosers, right? It starts even before that. People trying to break into the top 20 universities like Columbia or Cornell, I think their acceptance rates used to be something like 10% or 15% even. And now they're like 3 or 4%. So the world has gotten a whole lot more competitive. And I personally think that it's the reason why our politics have become so polarized. So in this video, I'm going to go over how we got here and what I think are the solutions to fix it. So I think the main problem that we're facing is a matter of IQ. And I get that it's very politically incorrect, so that's why you're never going to hear this take. Most people don't know this, but over the last century or so, IQ has been steadily increasing every decade by about 3 IQ points. It's called the Flynn effect. It could just be from higher nutritional standards and things like that. An interesting thing has happened since the 1990s. Basically, the IQ has plateaued, and depending on how you measure it, it's actually declined in some ways. I think I know why that happened, but I'm not going to go into it in this video because I don't want to get canceled. But that's not really the main point anyways. The main point is that all of the jobs of the future require an increasingly higher IQ. And we as a civilization simply don't have those brains. So what do you do about that? Like, I don't know if you guys remember, but people used to say, oh, a college degree, that's just a high school degree now. Or, oh, a master's, that's basically the same as just a bachelor's now. And the standards just go higher and higher. There's a fundamental problem here. Because the United States is so politically correct, they'll use the word education and intelligence as sort of interchangeable when they're not. And this is a major problem. Having more education doesn't make you more qualified for a lot of the jobs of the future. The jobs require a higher intelligence. And the problem is that intelligence is immutable for most people. I mean, parents have been trying to hack these things since forever. They play Mozart to their baby in hopes that it'll bump their IQ up by 1 or 2 points. And all these studies are inconclusive. It doesn't really seem to work in any way because IQ is just inherited. The normal curve of IQ is static. The mean is not really moving up anymore. A smaller and smaller percentage of people on the bell curve, on the IQ bell curve, are qualified for the jobs of the future. And so what do you do about that as a society? All right, so why is it true that the jobs of the future require an increasingly higher IQ? I'll walk you through 1 or 2 examples. So when Bill Gates created Microsoft Excel, a lot of people don't realize this because they're too young, but people used to have those spreadsheets on paper. Like, teachers used to put the names of their students in those different cells. They used to write them down by hand and add up all their grades with a calculator and then, tally up their final grade for the class. And they would sit there and do that tedious work for hours. And now they can just open up Excel and just, click a button and all of a sudden all the grades are calculated. And that's just a simple example with a teacher, but a lot of accounting gets really complicated, and they have all these saved spreadsheets where they just click a button and it just generates all the outputs. Tools like this have been incredibly useful. That's why Bill Gates was the richest person in the world for a long time and still is, in the top 10 or whatever, because he created a technology that made people way more productive. Another example is with AI. When I was at my quant trading firm last year, I started using AI to write my code for me, and I would say it 4x my productivity. And I think recent data shows that most of those big tech firms, about 30% of their newly released code is just written by AI. And I think that number is going to get closer and closer to 100%. So in those stand-ups, it's not like people just said, oh, well, that's great, you got all that code done way faster, so go take the rest of the week off. Like, that's not what's going to happen, right? They just raise the standards of how fast you can pump code out. They're just like, oh, okay, well, this is the new normal now, so we expect you to be 4 times as productive in pumping out code. That's just how that works. So same with the teacher, right? Or the accountant that's using Microsoft Excel now. They're way more productive now, so they're just expected to get way more work done now. It's not like they can just take the rest of the week off. So ultimately, that's what Keynes got wrong, right? When he thought that we would have these 15-hour work weeks, he just assumed we would just get that work done and then we'd get to take the rest of the week off. But that's not what happened. The corporation said, well, we expect you to just be more productive now. But those productivity gains were real. So where did they go? Well, they just went to the top. The owners of the firm, their shares became more valuable because the firm's earnings went up because they're being 4 times more productive now. All of the productivity gains went to the top. Yes, it's true. Some of it trickled down for sure. When the firm as a whole is earning a lot more money, bonuses will be bigger and your annual raises might be a little bit bigger. But disproportionately, a lot of those productivity gains went to the top. And so that's why wealth inequality just continues to get bigger and bigger. And it's just sort of baked into how capitalism is designed. You know, with those examples, with Microsoft Excel and AI code editors, what's happening is that the lowest complexity jobs are slowly getting automated away. Like an ATM machine is an automated teller machine. So there doesn't need to be a teller there anymore. So over time, on the normal distribution bell curve, the jobs from the lowest IQ to the highest IQ are slowly getting automated away. And that's not happening in a clean, straight line, of course. It's been a little bit patchy, if you will. You know, it surprised some people that Ghibli Films artists and Pixar artists and people like this might be losing their jobs, and freelance writers and programmers. You would have thought developers would have been protected for longer because that's a pretty high IQ job. So it's not literally in a straight line from lowest IQ to highest, but it's a bit patchy. So why is that? It's mostly because growth in software, and I would put AI within software, has been way more explosive than growth in hardware. By hardware, I mean things like robotics. It's difficult to have rapid growth in robotics because it's such an interdisciplinary field with physics and mechanics and all these other things involved. It's difficult to troubleshoot and debug robotic systems. So the growth in that has been way more of a grind. So a lot of the jobs that still exist that are lower skill are, you know, the gig economy, Uber driver, TaskRabbit, DoorDash delivery, things like this are still harder to automate. But we are finally getting those gains in robotics now with the Tesla robots and so on. Some of those little gaps are going to start to get plugged up. Yeah, when fully autonomous vehicles really starts to go mainstream, you know, that's a lot of trucker jobs that are going to go away. So what do our politicians think of this? What is their plan for this? Well, the problem is that they're too politically correct on the topic of things like IQ and raw talent. So they'll say things like, you know, I think Obama was asked, like, well, what are we going to do about all these coal miners that are out of jobs now? And he's like, oh, they can just learn to code. And like, yeah, I have to choose my words carefully when I say this, but like, you know, these aren't really the type of guys that can easily reverse a linked list, if you know what I mean. You can't just tell them, oh, I don't know why you were doing such a dangerous, low-paying job, but why don't you just learn how to code and now you'll make 5 times that? Like, you don't think these guys considered that before? You know, there's this question of natural aptitude. What do you do with people who don't have the natural aptitude to do more complex work? And that's the problem we're facing as a society right now. And in my mind, it's the root of all of the struggles that this generation are facing. So as automation continues to thin out the middle class, you're seeing this increasing wealth inequality between the rich and the poor, and everyone's just being pushed into getting higher education. Yeah, it annoys me that it isn't higher education. It isn't the education itself that the economy needs. It's smarter people. And so that's creating a lot of problems culturally because you're getting a lot of people who aren't really smart enough to going to college. And because they can't succeed in any of these difficult, rigorous majors, they just major in basket weaving or something silly, and then they get into all this debt, and then they come out and complain about, I'm college educated, where's my job, you know? And it's like, well, I mean, you know, technically you have a college degree, but you know, there's sort of a collusion between the government and the university in you, because you know, what happened here when like when a dumb person gets a college degree in something simple that's not useful or marketable in any way. What happened is that the government encouraged people to go to college. Universities in collusion said, yeah, you should come to college, pay your $40,000 or $50,000 a year to us. And then the individual said, I want to tell people I'm a college graduate. I want people to think I'm smart, so I want to go to college too. And so there was this collusion between these three parties, and the end goal is supposed to be that you come out of college as a person who's capable of doing a more intellectually rigorous job, but you aren't. So what happened there? Yeah, what happened is frankly a layer of political correctness. The government didn't want to say, they didn't want to explicitly say, we want intelligent people to go to college and gain the skills so they can apply their intelligence. They want to kind of sugarcoat that intelligence part. So they just said, oh, we want people to go to college. No, they don't. It's it's a huge inefficiency. It's a huge waste of time for dumb people to go to college. It takes spots from actual smart people. It's a big waste of money. They come out of college in debt. It's a waste of time. It's completely counterproductive. In Asia, they don't do things this way. They start filtering you out by your intelligence based on tests you take in elementary school. And then if you're not that smart, you get put on this dumber person track from middle school and onward. And that's actually more efficient, if I'm being honest with you. But the US, with this like soft, polite culture and this political correctness, they don't want to say that. So you get this incredible inefficiency in how we talk about education versus intelligence, which are two totally different things. The jobs of the future are seeking intelligence. They don't care about education. That's why Peter Thiel has the Thiel Fellowship, where he just plucks out smart kids from high school or early college and just tells them, hey, you don't need to finish college. You'll just learn on the job. Just come work for me and I'll give you $100,000, like $100,000 grant. The alumni from his Thiel Fellowship are all doing great. Wow, what a surprise. It turns out education isn't really that important. It's just the raw intelligence that's important. But again, like taking one step back into the big picture of what's happening, there's this thing called the Lorenz curve, which is kind of like the L-shaped curve of wealth inequality. And it just gets steeper and steeper every year. And the middle class just continues to thin out. And because people don't like to talk about money or their own financial hardship, their disgruntled feelings sort of manifest in ideologies. Just get these like really progressive leftists who are really into, intersectional feminism, and the overall theme between all of their ideologies is equality. They really latch onto these ideologies that put equality ahead of everything else. The reason for that is it's economic equality they're looking for. By talking about cultural equality, it's right adjacent to it. A lot of the solutions to cultural equality are economic, right? As a recent example, during all the BLM riots in 2020, 2021, the solutions to these quote-unquote cultural issues were things like Uber waiving fees for Black-owned businesses, right? That's an economic solution to a seemingly cultural problem. And so that's sort of the sleight of hand that happens with those like really progressive ideologies. They're sort of a form of cultural Marxism. And that's their way of trying to find solutions for the increasing wealth inequality they're facing, and the feeling of feeling left behind as automation and outsourcing is sort of taking away all the lower and middle skill jobs. And the right is getting more extreme as well. They sort of turned into the party of Trump, and Trump's approach is way more brute force. He's basically just trying to bring manufacturing jobs back to the Rust Belt. I generally like Trump's spirit and where his mind is at, but I think economically that simply may not be feasible. I think bringing back high-end manufacturing, fully automated manufacturing in the US can totally be done. But I think actual people working on a factory line just doesn't make sense for the private sector to have people in America doing that. Unless it's a matter of national security, then it's just something that the US government will subsidize. But if it's something that's controlled by the private sector, they'd rather have people in India or other countries doing that for lower wages. So I don't fully know how Trump's plans, how he tends to execute those, or whether he just said that to the Rust Belt to get their vote. I'm not completely sure, but I don't see us revitalizing the Rust Belt like it was in the 1980s. So both the left and the right, I think their prescriptions for solving this problem are incomplete or flawed. And so I want to go over what I think is the inevitable solution for these problems. Futurists and think tanks have been studying how they believe society is going to evolve. And, they believe that AI is going to slowly take all the jobs from lowest skill to highest skill. And in the end, it's just going to be like 1% of the population that is employable. And they're going to just be the smartest people in the world with like 3 PhDs each. And they're going to just sit at a table and basically debate in what direction they should develop AI to do more work for human civilization. So I think Andrew Yang and his UBI, he was a little bit early, but I think UBI is basically inevitable. The other 95% of the human population is simply unemployable. What are you going to do that a super smart robot can't do better than you and cheaper than you? Like, literally nothing. So UBI is basically going to be inevitable. And I think governments can roll it out slowly to just sort of feel it out and feel out the economic shockwaves that could come from it, unintended consequences. You know, people who have the ambition, they can pursue their passions and try to start businesses or try to monetize their hobbies. And there will always still be other ways to make money. Frankly, it'll probably mostly just be ways to entertain the ultra wealthy. You know, there'll be a billionaire class and everyone else. And because robots are doing all of the jobs in the economy, the only ways for normal people to make extra money will be somehow entertaining the billionaire class. It's going to be very Hunger Games, basically. The billionaire class will probably come up with all these ways to entertain themselves using humans, because it's you know, like a gladiator type event is not really fun if, you know, you just have robots beating each other up. As sadistic as it sounds, it's entertaining knowing that it's a human that is at risk. Basically, I think like a Hunger Games type situation, not fights to the death, but just humans doing things that are potentially demeaning in order to entertain the ultra wealthy. That's going to be one of the only ways to make money when the world is run by robots. You're already seeing a little bit of that gradually happening in our modern world. So with all the jokes about Instagram models being flown out to Dubai, these oil guys are worth billions of dollars. And so for their entertainment, they'll throw 30 grand at some pretty Instagram model to do vile things to her. And that's their form of entertainment. This sort of culture and the increasing sugar dating culture, those type of things are becoming more mainstream. I think what's more interesting is watching what the tech elite billionaires do with their money as clues to where they think the future of the world is going. Because you have to understand that these guys, with their billions of dollars and their access to the smartest and most powerful minds in the world, they have inside information on what direction society's going to go. These guys consult with futurists and elite think tanks that, you know, their whole job is to do the best they can to forecast the direction of the future economy and culture. And so let's see what these guys think is going to happen. One, and this is concerning, a lot of these guys are really big on doomsday bunkers. You know, like Zuckerberg bought out half of one of the Hawaiian Islands and built out his doomsday bunker there. And a lot of these other billionaires also have pretty elaborate doomsday bunkers. So they're definitely concerned that there is a chance of a major catastrophic event, like an apocalyptic level event. I think the way something like that plays out is if escalation between US and China really heat up from a Cold War to a hot war. We saw with COVID, China is more than capable of releasing some kind of bioweapon. With these kind of gain-of-function research projects, you know that they can release something way more powerful than COVID. Like, I realize it sounds like something out of a movie, but that's the world we live in now. You know, why launch, you know, Navy SEALs and do all this fighting with machine guns? You know, it's way more effective to just use a bioweapon. There's a lot of things like that can happen, and I think the billionaire class knows this, and so they have these doomsday bunkers. They've assigned a probability of this happening that's high enough where they've invested a considerable amount of time building out their doomsday bunkers. Let's say that this billionaire class assigns that like a 1 to 5% probability. They still think there's about a 95% probability that everything will go fine in the world. And so what does that look like? Based on the actions of this billionaire class, I believe the future world will look like this. So the vast majority of people are unemployable. And so aside from entertaining the billionaire class through being flown out to Dubai and doing these vile things for their entertainment, or, you know, some kind of like Hunger Games form of entertainment where you demean yourself in some way for their entertainment, the rest of civilization is mostly going to just escape into the metaverse, where they can be the king in their own metaverse world, where they can be in the billionaire class. And the metaverse will be so realistic at this point that it'll be a great substitute. It's kind of like going into the Matrix, right? Like that guy in the Matrix movies who said, "Oh, just like put me in the Matrix, make me someone kind of important." Like that's really realistic. Most people will take that option. And so I think what'll happen is people will buy their small Tesla homes. They'll have their Amazon groceries delivered to them by a drone or whatever. And that'll be the only time they take off their metaverse or, Vision Pro goggles, and they'll gobble down their food, and then they'll put their little goggles back on and sit on their little fancy massage chair with sensors on it. And then they'll just go into the metaverse where there's some king in some artificially made up world. And honestly, that's a pretty cushy life. Like I realize people, oh, that's so dystopian. I don't know, man. Like when I'm old, I'm kind of looking forward to that. That sounds pretty chill. Like you have to remember that that these artificial worlds are going to feel very realistic. So it's kind of like ultimately they're going to feel indistinguishable from the real world. That's the direction where these things are headed. So why would you live in the real world where you're just some loser who lives in a $15,000 small Tesla home? There's nothing special about you when you can live in an artificial world where you're a king, right? So most people are going to do this math and say, yeah, I'm going to live in the artificial world. And that's what these tech billionaires know. That's why Mark Zuckerberg is renamed his whole firm to Meta, because he's placing this huge bet on the fact that that's going to be the direction of the future. He consults with the most elite futurists and the most elite think tanks, and they also think that that's going to be the direction of the future. So that's how you prevent people from rioting. Not to make everything sound like it's about sex, but there's a well-known study that if young men don't see any hope to increase status and unemployment for the youth goes up to like 15 to 20%, there's this tipping point where it leads to riots. Because what do they have to lose? They're young, horny dudes, and their whole goal is to smash. And they are seeing no chance to do that. That's why the middle class is so important, because when there's a middle class, the lower class can reach the middle class can reach the upper class. So you see a clear ladder of progression for how you can be the man. And once the middle class thins out too much and it's just polarized, and then you see no rungs on the ladder to go from poor to rich, and then life gets even harder for you as a poor person and unemployment shoots up to like 20%, those dudes riot, because why wouldn't they? Like they want a chance to do something, and they'll do it by force if society gives them zero chances to make something of themselves. And so this whole plan to put people into the metaverse, it's a good plan, and it'll probably work. And so I think that's the inevitable path of the future for most people. I think the vast majority of society is gonna just be in their little Tesla homes. They're just gonna be like acres and acres of Tesla homes with little like drones and Tesla bots like delivering food to them. And in each Tesla home is going to be some dude just zonked out in his like comfortable chair with the headset on in the metaverse. And a much smaller percentage of the population is going to be out and about in the real world, and that's going to be the billionaire class, being entertained by the few people who choose to unplug and want to try to make money by entertaining the billionaire class. Well, it sounds very dystopian. I think net everyone will be happier then than they are now. Circling all the way back to the to the purpose of this video, everyone's struggling, and I think that we are currently in the uncomfortable phase of human history right before a lot of these big technological paradigm shifts where everyone starts to live in the metaverse. And once I think everyone lives in the metaverse, everything will be all right and people will be happier. You guys just gotta hang on a little longer and we'll get there. And you can be, Genghis Khan or someone in the metaverse, and it's gonna be fun and your life is gonna be dope. So just hang in there. We're probably 1 or 2 election cycles away from having universal basic income. And Zuckerberg is definitely cooking up the next version of the metaverse. So that's all I got. Let me know if you disagree in the comments. Take care.